let's take a quick recap of what we did in the previous class. So, where did we begin? Okay, so we began with looking at the last 4 parts of the Eightfold Path. Then, next, we had the foundation of the Sangha. Okay, you had the first disciples, then there was somebody who was very prominent, right, who joined. What was his name? Yasa. Okay, then we also, so what were the male followers called? Good bhikkhus, and the female ones were called okay, so who was the first bhikkhuni? Okay, Ma Prajapati Gautami. Who was she? Aunt of Buddha. Okay. Then, after we see this, then we saw the expansion of the Sangha. And then you had the missionary efforts where they are sent out. Now, there is, when it comes to the bhikkhunis, who was the one who pleaded with the Buddha? Then you had the missionary efforts where they were sent. Now, Ananda, we see, pleaded with the Buddha for the inclusion of women, and you have Gautami with her friends joining in. Now, what were some of the challenges? Okay, first challenge was, okay, so there was certain opposition from within, and you have Devadatta. So what does he do? Okay, so he wanted to become the successor of Buddha, but what was Buddha's answer? Rejected. What? Why? What did he say? Why did Buddha reject his offer of becoming the next successor? So he told that there would be a kind of a democratic way where the group themselves would succeed following the principles in the Vinaya. Now, what is this Vinaya supposed to be? A code of discipline. And then we have 3 attempts. After that, still he did not succeed. He attempted to create a separate group. But then we see that Sariputta and Moggallana, 2 of Buddha's chief disciples, were able to get these people back. Okay, these were the newly ordained monks who he sort of took away, made a breakaway group. They come back, and then finally we see that Devadatta becomes seriously ill and died about 9 months later. So now let's take a look at the final days of the Buddha. So after he had kind of trained his followers, he felt his mission was complete. And therefore we see that he sets out on his final journey around the age of 80. and he goes from Rajaga and travels north along with a group of monks. And as he moved along, he continued teaching along the way. He moved from cities, one village to another, and continued teaching as he went along. And as we see, as he went from village to village, there would be people who he would encounter, people who would ask for his teachings, people who would ask certain questions, and in this way, he would go about his work. So in due course of time, we see that he arrived at Vesali. Okay, now this was the capital of the Likhavis. Now, in Vesali, there was a park that was, in a way, donated to him by a celebrated person or a very influential person of this place. Okay, but we see that the Buddha chose not to spend the rainy season in that park, but he went on to the neighboring village of Beluva. Now we see that here the Buddha fell seriously ill. But we see that he chose to recover because he still realized that he had to prepare his disciples. So of course, he had trained them, they had learned his teachings, etc. Now he had to prepare them to carry on the work without him. And we see that despite his poor health, with a great deal of determination, the Buddha recovers. He overcomes his illness, recovers, and we see that he decides that he will bear all his pains, all his illness, and he will prepare his disciples. Now, during this time, we see that there is Ananda, who was the attendant, okay, as we saw yesterday, and he expressed his concerns about the death of the Buddha and the future of the Sangha. So, and therefore we see that, so he says, what will be the future now? And therefore the Buddha emphasized the importance of self-reliance. So he said, self-reliance plus the Dhamma should be the true refuge. That means they must find their answers from the teachings of the Buddha, from what they have learned with him. And he told Ananda that the Dhamma plus the Vinaya, the code of discipline, these two should be enough for guidance of the Sangha. And therefore he's clearly made it clear that there was no intention of appointing a successor. As we see last time also, when Devdatta had presented his proposal of being the next successor, the Buddha had said that he did not want any successor, and therefore he advised them to govern democratically, guided by the Vinaya. So now we see that the Buddha informs Ananda as well as all the monks that were assembled over there that within 3 months' time he would die. And therefore he encouraged the monks to spread his teaching for the benefit of all. And therefore we see that now he leaves Vesali and he claimed that this would be his last visit from that place. It would be his final visit to the city. Now we see that as they were going, the Buddha accepted a meal, from a man named Kunda, who was a goldsmith. Now we see that after this meal, the Buddha became ill. And now you should also see now, he is also concerned about what would be the social repercussions for Kunda. So we see he's had his meal, he knows it's his final meal, and now he tells Ananda to console Kunda. Now why? Because people would say, oh, he had meals at your place and he died, right? So what is the consolation? So Ananda is supposed to tell Kunda that before enlightenment also, we see that Buddha was given a meal, right? Yes? Now also, therefore, before his death also, this meal is provided by Kunda. Therefore, in a way, this has been a good deed that has been beneficial. It is not to be taken as a kind of a guilt, but it is supposed to be taken as an act of goodwill. And that his offering is meritorious. And then we see that the Buddha finally goes to Kusinara and rested between 2 sal trees, preparing himself for his death. And then we have the final instructions. So now we see that Ananda, who was very close to the Buddha, in a way is not able to accept the whole fact of what is going to happen. And therefore we see that the Buddha consoles him and also comforts him, reminding him about the impermanence of all the things in the world. So basically the teachings that we have already seen earlier. Then we also have Subhada, who is accepted by the Buddha, and he becomes the last direct disciple of the Buddha. And we see that the Buddha then addresses the monks one final time, and he says, transient are all conditioned things. Try to accomplish your aim with diligence. Okay, so he says that all things are transient and accomplish things with diligence. So that means basically just a recap or a summary of all his teachings in 2 sentences. And therefore he also told them not to occupy themselves too much about what would be done after his death. He said it would be the lay disciples of his who would look after his cremation. And we see that a week later his body was cremated by the Mallas in Kushinara. So after his death, we see that there is a dispute which arises with regards to the relics. And here we see that there is a Brahman Dona who resolves the relics. Now this dispute in a way for the relics arose between the Mallas and the rulers of several kingdoms. You have Magadha, Vesali, Kapilavatu. So why? Because we see that the connection of Buddha was there with all of these places. So it was here by an old Brahmin by the name of Dona. He said that they should not quarrel on the relics of the Buddha. And therefore they had a kind of a common consent, and the relics were divided into 8 portions. And it is said that the stupas were built over them. Okay, so this was in short the final days, death, and the division of the relics of the Buddha. So now what we will see is we'll try to answer some of the questions that arose yesterday, which I said I would deal with at the end of the class. So one of the questions that was asked was, is the Dalai Lama a Buddha? Okay, so let's take down certain of your reasons. All those who say yes, the reasons. Okay, so somebody said, why? Because he is not enlightened, so therefore not, right? So how many of you all have said that he is? Okay, so yes, as we said last time also, that as long as the teachings are being followed, it's only when there is kind of disorder, then to bring in order, you have the Buddha, then is again in a way born. Now let me directly deal with the question. So the answer is no. Okay, we cannot consider him as a Buddha, but why? Okay, first and foremost, we see that he is a spiritual leader and also a high-ranking Lama in the Tibetan Buddhism. Now, let's take a role of what is Dalai Lama's role and how it differs from that of the Buddha. Now, first and foremost, we see that the Dalai Lama is believed to be a reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara who is the Bodhisattva of compassion. Now, who is a Bodhisattva? Any idea? Okay, let's deal with it. So, we see that a Bodhisattva is somebody who has attained enlightened. So, he is an enlightened being, but we see that who chooses to remain in the cycle of samsara. That is rebirth. Why does he choose to be in this cycle of rebirth? In order to help all sentient beings to reach enlightenment. And therefore we see that the Dalai Lama is a spiritual leader of the Gelug school of Tibetan Buddhism. And we see that he also held political leadership in Tibet. Now the current Dalai Lama is supposed to be the 14th reincarnation, as they say. Born in 1935, and he is recognized as the reincarnation of the 13th Lama. So when he was just 2 years old, he was recognized as the reincarnation of the 13th Lama. Now in a way, he also has played an important role in promoting Tibetan Buddhism as well as we see that he is also an ambassador for peace, non-violence and interfaith. Now let's come to the difference between the two. We have already seen a little bit about the Dalai Lama now. Let's see the difference between Buddha and the Dalai Lama. So we see that the Buddha is one who is fully enlightened. And we see that he is liberated from this cycle of rebirth. As we said, on the other hand, the Dalai Lama is a Bodhisattva of compassion, and as we said, he is a spiritual leader, and his role involves teaching, guiding, and leading followers to enlightenment. Now we see that this concept of the Bodhisattva is very much central in the Mahayana school of Buddhism. As we move little bit ahead into the philosophical aspects, we'll take a look at this in detail. Okay? And in this way, we see that a Bodhisattva deliberately chooses to remain in this cycle of samsara to help others. So with this being said now, let us just try to see a little bit more about the Bodhisattvas. Basically in terms of a few characteristics. So first we see that he is a person who has an awakened mind. In a way, there is a sincere wish plus determination to be enlightened. And this enlightenment is not for himself, but it is for the benefit of all. Okay, so this very fact, this altruistic nature is something that in a way sets the Bodhisattva apart from other practitioners. So we see that others also may be in a way searching for enlightenment, but that enlightenment is only for their own benefit. Here we see that a person is ready to be in that whole state of rebirth, ready to participate in rebirth, and is able to attain this for the benefit of all. Next we see that there are certain specific vows. So now what are the vows that they have? Okay, so basically here they follow the 6 perfections. First one is generosity. Now the 6 perfections are also called as the paramitas. So first one, as we said, is generosity. So here, giving material help, time, energy, and also spiritual guidance. Next is ethical discipline. So, leading a moral life which is free from harmful actions. Then patience, that is being tolerant and understanding in the face of various adversities. Effort, so being perseverant in practice. concentration, so having deep focus, and finally wisdom, that is understanding the true nature of reality. So, generosity, ethical discipline, patience, effort, concentration, and wisdom. So, in a way, we see that these bodhisattvas will have a perfect balance of compassion as well as wisdom. So, compassion will move them to alleviate the suffering of others, while wisdom will help them to understand the true nature of reality. Okay, so next let's take a look at one of the stages. Okay, so it is said that the journey of the bodhisattva is described in stages, which is known as the 10 bhumis. The details of this we'll see later when we come to that particular section in the course. So, as of now, what we need to remember is that these are stages of or progressive levels of spiritual development and realization. These bodhisattvas are also a major figure in the Mahayana Buddhism, as they are exemplars, guides, practitioners, and their stories and example is supposed to inspire the followers to cultivate compassion and wisdom in their own lives. So now let's take a look at another question which was asked, and that is, what is the arhat? Who is an arhat now? Perfected one, right? So can an arhat be considered as a Buddha? So let's see what the class feels.
Arhat is a kind of a lower level to become Buddha.
Okay, so let's put things down. Okay, so let's first take down what you all have to say. So, you said lower level. Okay? Any other answer? Okay, so you're saying that they are on the way. Okay, so let's put it down. Well, we see that Arhat has also achieved enlightenment. Okay, so we'll come to that difference later. So in a way, he is not on the way, but he also has achieved enlightenment. Any other answers? Okay, they can guide others. Okay, so basically, as we see, they serve as models or teachers guiding others. Okay, so quickly let's take a look at. So who is an Arhat? As we said, by definition, one who is liberated, who has achieved nirvana, liberated from the samsara, that is the cycle of death and cycle of rebirth. In a way, we see that they have eradicated all defilements and they have achieved personal enlightenment. Now we see that what is the path? How do they achieve this? This is generally achieved by following the teachings of the Buddha, by practicing the 8 noble path, and their journey involves deep meditation, ethical conduct, which leads them to gain wisdom. So as we have said, since they have overcome ignorance and suffering, they become models or teachers within Buddhism and they share their insights with others. And in the Theravada Buddhism or the Theravada school of Buddhism, we see that being an Arhat is the highest goal. In a way, it represents the culmination of spiritual practice and realization of ultimate truth. On the other hand, we have seen who is a Buddha. Who is a Buddha? Complete and perfect enlightenment. Okay? And then, how has the Buddha achieved his enlightenment?
By himself.
By himself. Okay? So we see that the Buddha has achieved enlightenment by himself. So in a way we see that he follows the path of accumulating merit and wisdom over countless lifetimes. Okay, so unlike the Arhat who has attained enlightenment by following the teachings of the Buddha, Buddha discovers the path to enlightenment by himself or independently. And therefore we see that he is revered as the supreme teacher, and therefore they have the unique ability to articulate the Dhamma, and as it is said, their whole purpose is when there is a destruction or a disorder of the teachings, they then come in order to restore the order. So first and foremost, when we look at the key differences, first and foremost we see that the path to enlightenment is different. One is a personal enlightenment, whereas the Buddha has a complete and perfect enlightenment. Next is they reach this by following the Dhamma and the Noble Eightfold Path, whereas the Buddha has achieved it by himself through his methods. Now, Arhats are the models or teachers within the Buddhist community, whereas the Buddha are the world teachers. So, though both have the capacity for wisdom and compassion, we see that Buddhas are depicted as having a greater capacity for both.
The first difference, personal enlightenment and the enlightenment of Buddha. What is the difference?
See, he has achieved perfect enlightenment, and this enlightenment is not for himself, but it has been for the benefit of all. Because the Buddha also, in a way, in the Mahayana tradition, they say that he also follows the Bodhisattva path, in a way. Okay, and in this way, this enlightenment is not a personal enlightenment, but it is an enlightenment for all. Okay, so this is basically, in short, the difference. We can still discuss on it more, but for the time being, I want you all to reflect on these two questions. Okay, so take down the questions. So that is, Siddhartha, despite being raised in luxury, chose to renounce his princely life to seek enlightenment. What does this tell us about the Buddhist view on material wealth and spiritual fulfillment? Okay, and the next one is, how did the four signs, old age, sickness, death, and the ascetic, influence Siddhartha's decision to seek enlightenment, and what do these signs represent in the broader context of Buddhist philosophy? So now you have seen the whole story, you know the complete picture of his life. Now go back, reflect on these four signs, and try to see that what do they represent in the overall picture.